All right, well, welcome everybody and good evening. Welcome to the Raymore City Council work session for Monday, April the 5th, 2021. We have we actually have a couple of items on the agenda tonight, one under other, but the main reason we're here tonight is to talk about the American Rescue Plan. This ought to be interesting. Go ahead, Mr. Fearborn.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Always interesting to talk about getting rescued.
Yes.
As the council may or may not have heard, we are going to have a considerable amount of funding come to us from the federal government. We anticipate approximately $4 million. The mechanics of that amount are, and how we're going to receive it, are not yet finalized. Originally, the payments were going to be made directly to all municipalities from the federal government. We are now hearing that there is the possibility that they will still get them the same way, but they may be funneled through the state. I would loosely call it kind of the same format as a block grant. Because the state would have it first, the degree of distribution as far as a fine date is concerned is still in question, and the degree to which state administrative costs could be taken out of that $4 million, it's a little over $4 million right now, is still in question as well. The payments are to come hopefully within 3 to 4 weeks for the first payment, which will be 1/2 of the amount, and then the second half of the amount, assuming everything goes as planned, would then come almost exactly 12 months after the first payment. So staff was discussing this payment coming to the city, and I had a very specific recommendation that I'd like the council, tonight's a very high-level discussion on this, I would like the council to allow staff to pursue as far as getting the details of authorization associated with the use of these funds. Specifically, what I would like to recommend to the city council is the possibility of using the funds to build a new brick and mortar police station justice center that would house all the elements of our expanding police force and court and all of our storage needs, dispatch needs, to include the possibility of what dispatch would look like in this county in the future. To do that, though, I didn't want to get too far down the road because, again, we get one payment this year, another payment this year, and it would be a very nice start to the amount of funding that we would need for that kind of a facility, but we would need a lot of additional funding through our next GO bond issue to fund that. Of course, when the use tax passes, we're going to have more officers down there. One of the questions many of you have asked me is, how long is it sustainable to keep the police department downstairs? A component of this would be, what do we do with downstairs once the police department, we would be remodeling it for uses as well. So a good estimate, good conservatively high estimate of what we would probably need to do all of this is $15 million. So the next bond issue could conceivably get us all the way there, and then some. The problem with that is that the funds that we're receiving through the Rescue Plan Act are supposed to be spent by the end of 2023, although that's now in flux and it may be 2024. We would not be able to spend those by that time. So the two questions that I would like absolute black and white writing authorizing us for this use of funds would be, number one, can we do this with these funds? We think we can. Our interpretations, our initial interpretations are that we could use this because the original CARES Act funding allowed us to use this, and they just expanded on that for the recovery plan funding, adding 7 to 8 items on what those funds could be used for. But that's our interpretation. I want to make sure that who's ever giving us the money has that same interpretation and we get an authorization for that. The second item is, if the council were to pass an ordinance or a resolution dedicating these funds to this use within a certain time frame, that we would figure out when we would have the bonding capacity to go for the rest of it, would that be as good as spending the money? Again, interpretations from the CARES Act would seem to indicate that that is good, but I would want that in writing from someone. I didn't want to be going and approaching folks at that high of a level about these two items and asking for authorizations from them if I felt that the council was really against this idea for this particular funding. So I wanted to come to you tonight because it is somewhat time sensitive. If we're going to be receiving the first of these funds in 3 to 4 weeks, and just see how that plan kind of laid on you all, and if you're all okay with me at least pursuing getting authorizations. Not that that would necessarily be the final use of these, but if you all are in favor of this plan, it would certainly be the direction staff would want to be seeing the use of these funds for and recommending to the city council. That concludes staff report on this item, sir.
Thank you, sir. Sure that offers a lot of questions to be posed here. Mr. Barber, go ahead.
Well, first of all, is Ward 3 trying to be silenced tonight? We don't have microphones here, so.
Oh, sir, I'm sorry. Can you grab this?
In that case, Mr. Mayor, I have questions since they don't have any microphones.
Overriding questions, I'm sure, sir.
Go ahead.
That was my first question. My second question is, this money, we didn't ask for this money. This money wasn't, this money was just, here you go, you got this money, and do something with it.
That's correct, sir.
Okay. So I think it's conceptually, I think it's a great idea. I'd like to know more, like you said, find out if we can do it, and find out a closer price tag of what you think it would take. And also, I would assume you're talking about putting it on property we already own too, so we wouldn't have to purchase property?
Possibly.
Okay.
I haven't measured those drapes yet.
Mr. Holman.
I think it's a great idea too. I mean, we've heard time and time again in our surveys that public safety's number one concern of our citizens. Great support for our police department, great satisfaction with our police department. We're a growing city, the police department's growing. This makes the most logical sense of those funds that I can think of. It's a great idea.
Mr. Townsend.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I agree wholeheartedly. I've had this conversation with you before as well regarding our police force and, are we exceeding the capacity we have downstairs? But as Mr. Barber has said, this is kind of money that we didn't ask for. And this is also just kind of throwing an idea on the wall, see if it sticks, is other communities around us that we're in partnership with regards to the bridge and I-49. What options are there if that is not available to us, that we can kind of say, if you got free money, we got free money, how about we add this together, pool this together to further bolster the financing behind, the I-49 project.
Have you not heard about the $2.5 trillion infrastructure bill?
Yeah, and then there's that. So
Yeah.
there's the poke and the wish that we got going on there too. So.
Well, this was kind of a poke and a wish as well, and it happened.
So that also in mind, just putting that out there, if we are considering things, not saying that I'm against it, I am all for this, but just as another, something to have in your disposal in the discussions as those things start presented.
Unfortunately, and we've actually touched on that subject with the city across the bridge. The recovery plan money specifically calls out infrastructure. but it limits it, and it's limiting wording to water and sewer infrastructure, not roads. The $2.5 trillion package, of which 895 of it is actually for infrastructure, meaning that the vast majority is not actually an infrastructure bill. We are actually in the process. It was a very, very strange process for getting into the wheel for that, but we already have. Each representative from the House of Representatives was given a clean slate to submit 10 projects. We had been building on our package from the build grant to approach Representative Cleaver because he has a strongly vested interest in the I-49 project. The likes of the build grant, if this passes Congress, grants are going to go away, is what we're hearing. And when you hear things like, okay, every member of the House of Representatives turn in 10 projects, we're back to an earmark system, which should not be surprising with the turn in the administration. It tends to be Republican administrations prefer a grant system, Democratic systems prefer the earmark system. Hits a little closer to home. So we have actually still approached Representative Cleaver, but he already has his 10 projects in line. Our approach to Representative Cleaver has turned to, when you see this in the earmark package, we recognize it's not one of your projects that you're going to be sponsoring, but will you be supportive of this? And initial indications are that he will be. We've also approached Graves to ask the same question, got the same answer. We approached both of our senators, and they're still trying to figure out the change from the grant system to the earmark system, so their support will come later, I am sure, when that becomes inevitable if this bill actually passes. But when we put it in with Representative Hartzler, who claims that this is not just one of 10, this is her project that she is going to be sponsoring out there. We increase the amount from widening the highway to widening the highway and doing the bridge. So it's now a $70 million project. So that's where we're going with that. Still want to get something in writing. I know I keep saying that a lot tonight. I want to get something in writing from Representative Cleaver's office, and I think so does Belton. We had a very, very good meeting last week after all of this started rolling, and Belton, and especially Greg, you all know Greg, has been a real bulldog. And he has a considerable, through Mark, he has a considerable amount of background with the earmark system. So he's been out there making the contacts that he needs to be making.
Excellent. Well, I'm scheduled to, if the schedule avails itself, this Friday to be at an event that Congressman Cleaver is at. So if there's anything that I can do to glad hand that conversation along, just to say hi, I don't know, just let me know. And then
I'll be in touch, sir.
We'll see. So, all right, sir. Thank you. And hopefully, I know on that $2.9 trillion, there's 10 bridges, so we're not one of the 10 bridges that they're talking about?
Probably not.
All right. Thank you, sir.
Yes, Mr. Jacobson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Actually, Councilman Townsend hit on exactly one of my questions, and so I have that answer now. The other question I would have is, let's say we can do this, but we have to wait for a period of time for another GeoPond issue to come up. And are we allowed to put this money in an interest-bearing account of some kind? Is that permissible?
Oh, yes, sir.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yes, Mr. Berenson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Filburn, I also support this, and I think it's probably a very good use of the funding. If for some reason we find out that we're not permitted to do this, is there a second choice that you would use the money for, or anything else that was discussed besides this?
Not yet, sir. We met on this 2 weeks ago. Last week was a little bit harried with the whole transportation issue, but it is on the management team's agenda for tomorrow morning to start talking about just in case scenarios.
All right, thank you.
I know that for the purposes of the COVID recovery, so to speak, I assume the county's 12 million that they've are coming their way is from the rescue plan is going toward their health department, because they've been trying to figure out a way to pay for that anyway, and that was something that they had planned to put on the agenda for the election tomorrow, but pulled it off because there were so many other issues on there and didn't bring that about. But they need a way to fund their public health department, and this happened in the interim. So have you had any discussions with Mr. Houston or any of the folks down there about that?
Mr. Houston actually brought up at the Joint Cities meeting that any kind of money that they were going to be receiving in this regard, they wanted to do brick and mortar, and because if you've been down to the county health department, it is aged, and in light of the pandemic, that they were wanting to really either upgrade that existing facility or build completely new.
Yeah.
So they're also talking brick and mortar with these funds.
Well, I mean, in light of police reforms being, discussed quite a bit, I'm sure that's going to change some degree of the architecture of a new facility to help model that for purposes of social interaction and making things easier for the public and more transparency. Right now, the way our building's kind of built, it's a little closed off. I would think that we'd be looking at something of a more modern design to help through any other pandemic. I mean, I know, Chief, you may or may not have been thinking about this, but I mean, it kind of opens up the idea of us trying to design a building that kind of fits into this present time that we're, kind of moving toward a more transparent, more open environment.
It's interesting you would bring that up, sir. I'm going to have the chief speak to the task that she has been undertaking for the last several months.
Okay.
Thank you for the segue, sir. Actually, my command staff and I have been visiting a number of facilities all throughout the metropolitan area, looking at design exactly as you've indicated, much more open. Obviously, many of the facilities that we visited, we made the mistake of going to Leawood first. That was a
Everybody
serious
does.
tactical error on our part. I told everybody that works for me it's not going to look like that. So, but many of the facilities that we have visited, obviously, community meeting space is very important, and having that open feel, that interaction space, with our officers, depending on what the circumstances are. Individuals who want privacy to make a police report when they come in, or again, community meeting space is very important in the designs that we looked at, and have had the opportunity to visit a number of different spaces, realizing that our situation is somewhat unique in that when you go to a facility that doesn't also necessarily contain dispatch services, we have to look at a modification of what our plan would look like compared to some of those other facilities. We looked at the new North Patrol Station in Kansas City that doesn't have property and evidence. So when you're looking at those different buildings, you have to factor in, how much more space we would need for those kinds of things like dispatch and property and evidence. So we've seen some pretty exciting things that we've been out visiting, especially those new facilities that do incorporate in that, open and transparent feeling that we want our community to have with us. I'd be happy to answer any questions. We've been to about six or seven different
Oh,
locations.
excellent. Anybody else have anything?
That was a task that it was kind of difficult to give to the chief, because if you don't know, she was in charge of building which station?
Shoal Creek Patrol
The
Division.
Shoal Creek, and they actually banned her from that particular building site after.
Yes, I was.
So she was the perfect person to put on this.
Jay, did you have something?
Thank you, sir. Just a quick question. So, given status quo, what would be an estimated time frame on our next GO bond as far as follow-up funds to be able to do that project?
I would hope no later than 2024.
Wow, okay, thank you.
Yeah, I was going to say probably 3. Tom?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think you said earlier, if we get this project moved forward, we get some money now, some money later. We're looking at GO bond. But I think you said this money, they would like you to have it spent by 23 or maybe into 24. Is there a stipulation from the grant for the money? It has to be spent by a certain time.
Yes, the original timeframe was December 31st, 2023, but there is discussion now that may actually be amended to December 31st, 2024.
Which would come and can probably be better for us if we were building and moving in that direction to give you a little more time.
It depends on what, if they will accept a resolution from the city council, it all becomes a moot point.
Okay.
If the resolution is the equivalent of having spent the money, when the resolution passes, it would be spent.
Okay, thank you.
But we got to find out.
Exactly. So the council's okay with me moving forward, at least with determining the authorizations, I think is what I'm hearing. Thank you, sir.
Okay, the conclusion of that, so just one item under other, if you pass those around for me, I'd appreciate it. Dave Woosty with the Board of Adjustment, although his term doesn't end until October, has asked to be replaced. Just feels like it's time. We have an applicant, a very qualified applicant. The gentleman is actually a structural engineer and a partner in an engineering firm in Kansas City. Some of his clients are Walmart and Lowe's, a very qualified person. Bailey family has been active in our community for some time now. As you know, his wife Kim is on this with the state school board of education. Yeah, so she's a commissioner there. Previously on the RAPEC school board. Great family, and he has put in an application to volunteer to serve. I think he would have liked to have been on planning and zoning, but Board of Adjustment kind of get his toes wet on that. I think he'll be a great addition, so that will be proposed in a week at the next council meeting, unless there's anybody needs to holler at me over the next week, give me a shout. Okay? That's all I have. Do you have anything else under other to address
No, sir.
this time? Anyone else have anything? Okay, we'll stand adjourned. Thank you.